Here's a tip for you. If you ever get to the point during cooking that you look at something and you're like, wow, this is going to be really tasty, but it doesn't look very good at all, just shove it in a wrap. Tortillas have this amazing thing where you don't actually have to look at what you're eating. That fact kind of saved my culinary experience this time. For starters, I'm not exactly the best at filleting fish, so when I had gutted fish that still had bones in, it was kind of difficult for me to figure out how to cut off meat that can be usable for what I was attempting. I started out this by wanting to do some beer battered fish and chips. Not battered chips, but battered fish at least. So, we're going to start with chips. Same kind of ritual that we did in our first video, only this time instead of forming the roast potatoes, we're going to be wanting to make some chips. But once those potatoes are chopped, sign the name of the devil once again. You know the drill. Pour on the potatoes to that baking tray and add tree stalk and just rub it in. Then the infamous salt before we start making the batter. Now this is a very simple batter, we're just adding flour to some beer, and then to give it a bit of puff, I don't really know what this does to be honest, I'm guessing it just helps the crispiness of the batter come through. We're going to be adding a tiny bit of baking powder, and the good thing about this is you can kind of do it by eye. If it looks too wet, add a bit more flour, if it looks too dry, add a bit more beer, and this will just end up being deep fried. So here's the first fillet of fish that goes in, and this will be chucked straight into the frying pan. Here you can see all of them are starting to slightly flake in the pan, not exactly sticking fully to it. That's one of the issues here of making this single batter rather than doing a multi-layered batter. To combat this, we're going to double layer the batter. So I've done the first layer here, and now I'm going to take it out while it's still hot and let it drain for a bit, and then put it back into the batter mix, and then put it back into the oil. It's hard to see on here, but the batter is clinging a lot tighter to the fish. It's not exactly fully bound, and there are a couple of parts that do flake, but that's going to happen no matter how many layers that you do. As you can see, the colour looks lovely. The only issue is that the fish itself is starting to flake apart, like we said previously, which maybe makes it look a bit less appetizing than it would. But, like we said before, let's just put it in a wrap and it's perfectly fine. Now, this is where my plan starts to diverge a little. Because I kind of butchered the fillets, we didn't have enough meat on these fish chunks to sustain an entire meal. So I decided to add in some prawns that I had left over in the freezer. These will be cooked in the remainder of the oil that's left. I've poured a tiny bit out into my garden to stop it from going down the drains. Don't pour oil down your drains, it's a very, very bad idea, especially after deep frying, because the plumbers will hate you. Now we just mix these around until they're fully cooked. Once cooked, we chuck them onto the plate with the fish. Now, the thing that I was thinking here was to slightly spice them and give them a bit more flavour. So I made a slight spice mix with some chili powder and paprika. I also added the slightest bit of turmeric. This all comes together to make a nice spiced dish without being too overwhelmingly flavourful. Remember, this is simply trying to complement the flavours rather than provide new ones. So this is rolled around in its own spices, and then on top of that we're going to add some pepper. And then finally salt. And then once again rolled around just to make sure it's coated everywhere. This is a tortilla, not a tortilla, this is a tortilla. A double L in Spanish is always going to produce the Y sound. Anyway, rant aside, we need to put some cheese on here, and I opted for some cheese that has quite a low melting point. It's called Iberico, I believe that's how you pronounce it. This is also from Spanish, however I doubt my recipe would be endorsed by them. Anyway, I only put a few prawns in, so we're only going to add about 2 to 3 per wrap, and then cheese goes over the top of this, followed by the battered fish. I go through and add a bit of sauce that I made on my own. This is a secret recipe, i.e. I completely forgot how I made it, and I'm just putting it on this video to show that I've added some sauce in here. But it was lovely. I think it had like sriracha and cream cheese in or something. But now we just roll this up and do the same for the next one. And there you have it. Some weird concoction of a fish tortilla with chips, of course.